Hey everybody, how are y'all doing today? So thank you for the intro. So my name is Jared Palmer. I'm the lead engineer of the Palmer Group. We are a strategy, design, and engineering firm based in New York City. But today I want to talk about, let's see here. Today I want to talk about forms in React Native. So this is me, this is my company, and this is my podcast. It's with Ken Wheeler, so if you want to listen to us drink and talk about JavaScript and stuff, give us a listen, undefined.fm. So I mentioned I work in an agency. And in doing all of our client work, I'm a firm believer in the open source movement, and so I oftentimes open source some of our tools whenever possible. So this is the current open source portfolio. Razzle is a build system. After.js is like a Next.js sort of clone, but built with React Router. Backpack is a build system for Node.js. TSDX is great for building TypeScript packages, like create React app, but for TypeScript packages. But the granddaddy of them all is Formic, which is a utility library that makes it really, really easy to build forms in React. And today I want to talk about sort of that story and where we are and where we're going with Formic. So forms are really hard. And React's really good at a lot of things, but forms are not one of them. How many people here write a form every day? Let's see. Okay, couple, maybe not. All right. Well, they're pretty hard in React DOM, and they're also really, really hard in React Native, kind of what Mike had mentioned. You have to manage all of these things. And React doesn't tell you how to really do it, right? This is like the documentation for forms updated for React hooks. This is it. This is like the whole thing, right? You have some state, you have some sort of handler, and you get a text input, and you pass this handler to onChange text, and you pass the value to the text input. And this is for a controlled form, or controlled text input. But like more fundamentally, if we step back, why are forms so hard in React? And the answer is that this is pretty much what React does out of the box. And you are left to deal with wiring up form state, because you have state, maybe it's in a reducer, maybe it's in Redux, maybe it's in MobX, maybe it's in wherever it is, but you got to get it into the input somehow, right? You have to validate this stuff, because you're going to want to have error messages, right? Like, you can't trust the user for literally anything, so you got to validate it. You got to show them error messages. You got to test that all this works, all this business logic. And really, forms are at the heart of your application's business logic, right? Like, that's where things cannot go wrong. And then last but not least, as your application grows, regardless of its platform, you're going to have more and more forms most likely. And maybe if you're a game, maybe you won't. But just staying organized and doing things the same way, building reusable components and sharing those across your forms, attacking the problem of forms in the same manner each and every time is pretty useful, right? Especially when you're working on large teams. So faced with these issues, roll back the clock to 2017. I was building a really large administrative dashboard for a client. And this was the current state of React. Redux everywhere. Literally, everything was Redux. And Redux form was the most popular place to put all of this stuff, right? Just put it all global, make everything global. And Redux form was cool, and it served this purpose. But I was sort of on the group of people that kind of left Redux early, started moving to just plain old React. We're going to get into that in a second. And I was reading through Stack Overflow one day, and I was sort of deciding, and I asked Airbnb what they use, and they use Redux form. But this new app that I was starting on, this new dashboard, I didn't really want to use Redux for, and there really wasn't a form solution out there. Plus, I had this like inkling that form state's not really a global thing. The rest of your application just doesn't need to know about it. So perusing Stack Overflow, and I found this quote from Dan Abramov, which, if you look in Stack Overflow, it's form state is local and ephemeral. And so that got me thinking, like, okay, how hard is this to do, realistically? We all have these conventions, like you name things like handle change this, handle change that, handle submit, right? Like there were these conventions that had already existed. And there just wasn't an ephemeral version of it. All of the form management libraries were linked to either something like MobX or Redux. So enter Formic. I had this itch and I scratched it. So I built this. It started with a higher order component, and then it became a render prop, and now it will show off some hooks in a little bit. But I had some specific goals with Formic that are really important, that are perhaps different from other libraries. So I wasn't interested in schema-based forms. Those are forms where you use like a JSON schema or something and you defined every single field at one sort of a configuration-based approach. I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to use React. I also wanted to, and the way I phrase it is, I like to give back render control. All I was concerned about was form logic. I don't want to style inputs with this solution. I also don't care about a lot of use cases. I was building this, again, this administrative dashboard. I didn't care about every single edge case. I just wanted to solve for mostly every form. And I wanted the solution to pretty much do everything out of the box. I didn't want to have to install like 6 different libraries to get it to work. I just wanted it. And I wasn't so sure about it at first, to be honest. It was one of those things where, meh. So I needed it to be incrementally adoptable. And what's awesome about not using, or just using React, and we'll get to that in a second, is that makes stuff really easy. And the last part is I really wanted this to like not have any magic. No crazy JavaScript. I wanted it to be super easy to debug and understand. I just really wanted to use React. So beautiful things happen when you just use React. So if you ditch your external state management, if you don't use like subscriptions or observables, if you don't reinvent the wheel, if you just stick to the framework, it turns out that you get components that are really easy to use. They're easy to understand, they're easy to debug, they're easy to optimize, and most of all, they're easy to delete. I wasn't so sure about this Formic thing, which we'll show you in a second. And so I wanted to make the API like pretty similar to set state. So we have set field, and we'll show this off in a little bit, and set values. They'll start with set, so I could easily search, replace, and then ultimately delete them if this thing didn't work out that I was building. But that was super important because incremental adoption, and incremental deletion, I'll call it, allowed Formic to just explode in popularity. And so since its release in 2017, 6.5 million NPM downloads. We're at 2 million downloads a month, 17,000 stars on GitHub, and downloads are up 5x year over year. Users of Formic include like Airbnb, Walmart, Lyft, etc., yada, yada, yada. But I told you all this stuff, and now it's time to show you how it all works and sort of expose the pain that way. And I think I really want you to remember in this demo is the awesome benefits of just using React. So let's jump into the demo. I'm going to escape this here. I'm going to mirror displays. Oops. No, I don't want to deploy to now. Although that would be pretty cool. Okay. So woohoo, React Native. So I built this little app. What we're going to do with this demo is to demonstrate the pain points of what React does and doesn't do for you in React Native. And then we're going to build Formic together as a demo. And by that, you'll have a deeper understanding of how it works and how, if you went to go do this yourself, you probably would end up with the same thing. I don't know. We'll see. So we have this like sign-up form, which is the most basic form, right? You have this name, email, password. And let's just look through this code. So we're going to use hooks in this demo because hooks are all the rage. So name, set name, use state. Can we see okay? We'll zoom in a little bit. Can we see, or should I zoom in? Somebody call out. Zoom in, okay. Let's close this. Unable to write to user settings. That's not good. Oh, forgetting that. All right, now, hey, there we go. Cool, all right, better? More? More. I'm not gonna be able to see, but we're gonna be fine. Okay, cool. So we have a little onboarding screen, right? The first screen in your app, little form. So it works, you have name, and I enter in the name. I made this little debugger component, you can see the values. Okay, and I followed the direction that I gave before, right? I made these handlers, one for each input, which is super annoying, right? That sucks. Handle change name, text, set name, text. Handle change email, set email, text. Yeah, on and on. I have this submit handler, which I'm going to pass to a button down low. Ignore stuff, that's just for that. And I have some view. I have text input. I'm using React Native Paper, so shout out to CallStack. Woohoo! React Native Paper is pretty cool. So they have a text input. I passed on-change text there. I'd maybe pass value to name, right? And I put value here for email. And now we're wired up, right? We can keep going. And we'll do password too, value, password. Okay, so now they're actually hooked up into React. And we have three controlled inputs. Pretty cool. So what's not being done here, right? There's no validation happening, all right? I can enter in whatever, and I made a little thing. It's gonna, and that's not a valid email, right? So now I have to deal with validation, but like, when do I coordinate validation? Okay, like we could keep going and add all this stuff into this, and again, this would expand enormously, right? Taking care of validation and error messages, and then logic as to when to display those error messages, saving. Maybe you want to auto-save something. I don't know. There's a whole host of stuff you're going to have to do, right? Plus all your inputs and styles. And then if you're going to just do this in plain old React, on your next form, maybe let's say we have like a edit profile form, you're going to need to do the same thing. So what if we started just abstracting this away, right? What if we had one change handler that we could just reuse? What if we just had a single thing we could pass all of our values to initialize our form? And so what I want to do right now is I want to build like use Formic, basically. And the way we would get that done is pretty cool. So we're going to make a hook, a custom hook. And it's going to take some props, whatever you want to call them, props. And what if we just kept all of our values in a little variable called values, and we made a set values, react.useState. And what if we passed this hook something called initial values, props.initial values, or maybe just like an empty object. And that would solve our problem there. And then what if we made a handle change function that we're going to curry? It'll take a name, and then it's going to return a function that's going to return like a change handler that'll take text. This will just clean up their API a little bit. And what this is going to do is it's going to call set values, and we're going to use the updater version of values because it's going to depend on previous state. I'm not going to call it values. We're going to call this prev values. And we'll spread that, prev, because they ruined set state for us. We'll use an ES6 computed property. We'll call this name. And we'll set its value to text. Wild. We haven't done anything yet. Now this hook needs to return something, right? Let's just have it return for now. Return. Can't type today. Type better if I did. Values, set values, and handle change. And all we're doing here is just taking away this top, all this stuff is going to go away right now, right? We can delete all this, hopefully. And we'll just call our new hook, and it's going to return an object we're going to call Formic. Use Formic, and it's going to take initial values. And our initial values are going to be what they were before, email, not keymel, email, empty string. We'll do it in order. Name, empty string, email, password. Of course, I'm not going to spell that right. Password, right? And it's going to return this thing Formic. And inside of Formic is going to be what's up here. And now, let's wire it up. So let's just call stuff Formic so you see what's there for a second. And so instead of handle change name, remember we had that curried function, handle change, and we're going to pass it the name that we want it to be. It's going to be called name. And its value is now going to be, and it's going to be from Formic, so we'll call formic.handleChange here. And its value now for our text input is going to be values.name, formic.values.name. Same here. It's like a typing test. No TypeScript, unfortunate. email, formic.values.email, and let's be lazy. Password. Okay, so now we've wired up, hopefully. Look at that, we've moved all of this stuff into values and it updates. Pretty sweet. So we can keep going, right? Like, let's add handle submit maybe, right? And this is going to take, this is just going to be an empty function, right? And it's going to be, we're just not going to take any arguments. Handle submit is just going to maybe call like if props, I'll just call it props dot on submit, and you're going to pass that values. Values, right? But we want to like validate, right? We haven't talked about validation. We still have to handle that. So we're going to make a note that like, got to do some stuff first, right? Do stuff first, like validate. But that would work. So let's grab our little handle press sign up here. And let's pass this guy to on submit. And we'll replace all that here. And like in a real app, maybe you'd like save to async storage or do whatever, I don't know, then you'd navigate into the thing. Can't find variable handle press sign up, right? Because now we want formic.onSubmit. And we're going to call it handle submit for symmetry. And at the top here in Formic, we'll call this, we'll pass it down, handle submit. You can make this async if we really want to. And we'll return it. It could be useful later. Okay, so now if I press sign up, we submit. So now we have like this thing use Formic that's super useful. We can just port this all over the place. And we can keep going with this. And I did that. So we can jump ahead or we can keep going. But basically what you'd want to implement, and I'll just type it out here and then show it to you, you'd implement handle blur. And that's going to be, and you track which fields were visited. You'd implement validation. So maybe you'd pass in some function here called validate that would be run on every change and allow you to validate easily. And we can sort of show you what that all looks like. So in my use form as final here, I'm just going to copy pasta here. Skipping ahead, so we gotta get. So skipping ahead. So use Formic. What if it could keep track of fields? We could like register which fields are mounted or what field and when they're no longer mounted, and that's super useful for focus management. Again, values, set values, errors, set errors. And all these are just objects that we're going to keep track of. But the symmetry is that we're going to use the name of each field to sort of key the different parts of state. So if you look at the state, you'll see values.email, and you'll see it'll be values.name, values.password. Similarly, we'll model it as errors.email and errors.name and errors.password. That symmetry is super easy when you're going to debug stuff because you know where your errors are for a given field, where your touched state is for a given field, and where your values are for a given field. So yeah, so this is the handle change, set values, same, handle blur. We call this touched. And then we could keep passing all this stuff down like as I did it before, but we could also build sort of a Kent C. Dodds inspired getter function where you could do something where you have a text input, right? And you just call this function and you spread get field props, and it returns all the props that are required for this input to flourish and be awesome and be wired into Formic. And so you see here that by building, and this is what the final use Formic call looks like. You see initial values on submit. You could have your own validation function. And so our little form helper is doing a lot of great stuff. And I urge you to take a look at the source code that when I posted of this sort of mini Formic. But it does some really awesome stuff. But more awesome stuff is done in the real Formic. So let's now copy pasta to real Formic final here. And so in real Formic, and announcing today is the announcement of Formic Native, which is a new build of Formic that's specially purposed for React Native that's going to do new stuff, different stuff than, let's say, just the normal React DOM does. What Formic Native is going to do for you differently than React DOM is it's going to manage focus state. So one of the super annoying things about React Native forms is if you want your input to switch to the next input, you need to wire up all these refs. Like, how many people have done this? How annoying is it? It's the worst thing in the world, right? It's horrendous. So even if you use Formic right now, you have to make a ref for every single input, and then on submit editing, you call focus, right? Ugh, disgusting. Fixed. I got you. So in the new Formic Native, you can do this. Let's see if I can put the keyboard up. Hardware, keyboard, toggle software keyboard. Okay, watch this. In the new Formic Native, if I just do boop-a-doop, next, hey, that's pretty tight, right? Yeah, and then hit next again, and it'll just focus that. No keyboard touching. So all you get to do is call set focus. That's the API for right now. And what's super awesome about Formic is it's complete Formic Native and Formic 2 as well, is it's completely backwards compatible. One of the downsides to hooks is that you can't really use context, or you can't set a context provider with just a hook on its own. So that's why we still need this Formic component, because as fun as our use Formic function was that we wrote together, as your code base scales, passing props down gets more and more annoying. And so Formic has a context-only API, and that enables, if you're going to use that, which is the way it's sort of designed, you want to render this import big Formic capital F component. And but it's got the same thing as the use Formic API, which is just pure state. So this is going to render a context provider, but initial values, remember that. On submit, remember that. And then Formic, if you've never used it before, has this, you can pass in a custom validation function on your own, but even better, there's this awesome library called Yup. And Yup has this API that's like happy or joy. Happy.js's joy validation library. And it's got a builder pattern, like prop types. So you basically can specify your validation really quickly, almost in this prop type-like syntax. And so because I love this so much, Formic is a special prop called validation schema, which lets you write stuff like this, yup.object, and name, yup string required, and you just literally could pass in the error message right there. Formic will then run this against your form's values, and you don't have to think about when it runs. And then you can already see this required thing, email, so let's change this to required, whatever, right? So now if I hit tab, there you go. It's just there, boom. And what's super sweet about this is it's going to match the shape of your object. You don't have to use it, totally opt in. I like it. So let's talk about some of the new hooks that Formic and Formic Native, Formic 2 and Formic Native give you back. So one of the cool things that Formic Native does is it has helpers for text field, select, picker, all your React Native inputs that you'd probably ever use. And so if we're going to create a custom input, which you're probably going to do in any application, that looks like this. So let's walk through this code. We're going to import use text field from Formic. And we're going to call that, we're going to pass it a label. It needs like a name, right? Sort of the name we talked about. And you're going to get back this, a tuple of field and some metadata about the field. To get this red styling here, you'll see we just need to pass text input a Boolean, like if it has an error or not. And then we're using React Native Paper's helper text, and that's displaying this little red guy right there. And so really easily, you can build out an awesome number of primitives to reuse and share across your entire app on any form, and you don't need to prop drill, right? So what's nice about using context, which use text field does, is you can make changes to this input, and no matter where you use it in your entire application, you can make these changes, right? You don't need to worry about passing in different props, which is great. So that's what my text input looks like, and then again, to call it, we just render it out, and it's basically is spreading all these props, so it's a React Native paper input. So no matter what your library is, one of the best design principles of Formic is that it doesn't care how you render stuff, right? It's just concerned with logic. So whether or not this is React Native paper, your own component library, or the raw React Native inputs, it doesn't really matter. It's all wired up the same way. So just to give you a glimpse of the rest of form state here, so real Formic keeps track of all of this stuff for you. So values and errors and touched, is submitting, is validating, the number of submits, initial errors, initial touched, whether the form is valid, you can what field's currently focused, all that jazz. So let's see here. So we're going to go back to our keynote deck. And I want to turn off mirroring. So to summarize, what's coming? With Formic Native, you'll be able to use text input. These new hooks are coming. Use picker, use switch, use slider, focus management. It's also written in TypeScript, so you get perfect React TypeScript types. Woohoo, TypeScript. That would have saved me some typos. Formic's never been in a better place. It's now the most popular form library in the world. And that's pretty cool. I tried to do the math on this, and it's something like, I don't know, if you add up all the users of Formic, reported users of Formic, and you add up their monthly active users, it's like a lot of people touch a Formic form every month, which is wild. So now I just want to show off talk about our roadmap for Formic. So next week, I'm hoping to formally launch Formic 2, which has got the hooks of use field array. We didn't get into field array, but it lets you build arrays quickly. Sometime in September, we'll launch Formic Native. October, special surprise. And then we're going to rewrite the whole thing again. How many people here have heard of React Flare? A few? Okay, so React's reinventing the event system and upgrading it from 2015 when they last wrote it, which is great for us React Native folks because there'll be some unified APIs between web and React Native for the event system. And there's some new tools with React Flare. If you go to the React repo, you can check out React Flare, or they called React Events is the folder, and just start reading and start getting confused. But no, it's going to be great, and it's going to be great for Formic. It's going to boost performance. And so just to touch here about the last few things. When you just use React, there are so many benefits you get out of the box. A lot of Formic's success comes with the fact that if you just think about, if you've got an issue, oftentimes I just say like, how would you do this with React? And then the person will figure it out. And what's great too is when stuff like Flare comes, or even with suspense or concurrent mode, when React gets better, your library is going to get better or faster, or whatever the superlative is. So keeping things simple, keeping things within the framework is pretty sweet. You can't do it for everything, but it's a good place to start. And then the last bit that I'd like to share with you is a sort of like lessons learned part of all this, which is I think one of the Formic's greatest strengths has been its focus on just the 80% use case. If we tried to solve every single edge case, it actually would lose some of its flexibility and it would lose a lot of its understandability. So if you're open sourcing stuff or building stuff internally for your coworkers, intuition is important. Keeping your API footprints consistent is important. And again, just solve for 80% of your problems, and then the rest are going to be snowflakes anyway. And also try to open source it if you can. I was pleasantly surprised with how many people also thought forms were a pain. And I can't even imagine life without Formic now, because it's such a useful tool to my team. And so hopefully you find it useful, but if you don't, that's okay too. And that's sort of the beauty of open source. If you just scratch your own itch, take from stuff that's out there for sure, but just scratching your own itch can let you discover and make you a better developer and discover new ways to solve problems. And then sharing that with the rest of us is one of the greatest things you can do and one of the most fulfilling things that I think anybody can do. So with that, if you want to check out the newest stuff, npm install Formic at next. Formic.dev is the website. My name is Jared Palmer. Thank you so much. Thank you, CallStack. Thank you for inviting me here. You guys are awesome.